Hey everybody, welcome to RiverCity-Media and Beyond the Booth. I'm the Howard Cheney sitting in for Randy Cunningham that's on special assignment tonight. All the way over to my left over here is Phil Harris. You know him every week on here on Beyond the Booth. And the guy in between us is our guest tonight. Longtime sportsman we was talking about before we went on the air, but we'll get to that here in a minute. Jason Bowen of the Jackson County Sentinel. Jason, thanks for joining us tonight.
Well, thanks, guys, for having me on. Kind of told you earlier, I might be the least interesting guest y'all ever had, but I'll give it a shot here.
No, you saw more sports and covered more sports than most people will dream of. We spoke about before we went on. You're kind of like one of these college players that you're like, gosh, he's been around forever, and it seemed like it for you. But you said you've only been around for 23 years.
Yeah, when I got out of college, I went to work at the Weekly Post in Rainsville. And after a year, Dwayne Patterson, the legendary Dwayne Patterson, he trusted me to take over the sports. And that was kind of like letting somebody babysit your kid because, he loved it and he was dedicated to it. And I did that for nearly 3 years. And then I came to the Sentinel in the summer of 2005 and coming up on 20 years here.
That's when I remember you back starting out at the Weekly Post, and back then I remember always wanting to get the Weekly Post and seeing the top tens that you have, whether it be in I know y'all did it in football and you did it in basketball. I don't know about the baseball or not, but
we tried it one year. It was kind of tough. We pulled it off for a little bit.
But I always loved getting it on Thursdays and seeing who was in the top 10 on everything. And that's something that I know it's very difficult to get the stats to do all that stuff, but that's something I wish that would kind of come back in today's paper. And but like you said, it's very difficult to get everybody's stats in and all that. So,
I still managed to do it in football. It's a little tougher in basketball. So many games and everything. We're down to fewer papers, but man, those Weekly Post days, I remember there would be people that I knew had subscriptions, but we would put it in the rack on Wednesdays. It would come in the mail on Thursdays. And there were people telling me that they were going to the racks on Wednesdays because they couldn't wait for the mail to run the next day that they wanted to see it. And I always thought that was the coolest thing. Of course, bum pickings, that was a driving force on what people wanted to read. And that was a fun 3 years for me. It was, you had all these characters, I remember you're covering Paul Benefield and Terry Mitchell and Mike Cochran and just, that was on that DeKalb side. And a lot of those people I met back then, that I've still got those connections now that still help me, even though I'm not exactly covering DeKalb County anymore. Unless they cross over with somebody in Jackson, I've still got a lot of connections that I lean on and use even 20 years later.
Yeah, absolutely. And before we go any further, I said this the other night, and I've texted you multiple times and told you this, and I think I've told you a couple times in person, but as far as getting the information out on game nights and the next day and all that, on X, Twitter, whatever you want to call it, and on social media, you are by far the best that gets the information out there for the people to know what the scores are. And with the basketball, like you said, so many basketball games, you get the information out there as soon as you get it. And it's not just baseball, basketball, football. You get the Scottsboro City Schools has got the swimming and the wrestling and all that, and you make sure everybody knows what's going on, and you are the best at getting the information out there to everybody.
I try to treat every sport the same. I know people have preferences and if they like this sport, and this sport more, but somebody out there likes that sport. So, and there's kids playing it. So I try to one of the things I try to look at is I'm trying to chronicle this stuff for people 20, 30 years from now. Like I'm sure Phil goes back and reads about Valley Head, state championship they won. Well, if I do a bad job and just kind of 2 or 3 paragraph it and not really put into it, that's not something that they're going to look back on in 20 or 30 years and kind of get the warm and fuzzies and feel like they're back there again. So that's kind of the way I want it. I want people, like this week I had a guy, his daughter played for the Scottsboro girls basketball team that won the state, and he sent me a picture of the newspaper framed, that he got it framed and he's giving it to her. I mean, that fired me up to see that's something that she's going to have on her wall 20, 30 years from now and going to tell her kids about.
We talked about a little bit earlier about how long you've been in the business, and you mentioned Phil playing for the '84 state uh, championship at Valley Head. I'm surprised you didn't cover it as well.
Well, I didn't know how to read then and write. So I was just a few years away from that. But I would have loved to have been there and covered it. I heard it was a good one.
But basically,
I read about it because I get lost in these archives and flipping back through the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and I'll go to read something to fact check something or look when something happened. And the next thing I know, it's 2 hours later, and I've been just stayed in there looking, constantly going through things.
We're talking about state championships and all that. Being in Jackson County, my gosh, it's hard to keep up with how many state championships you've been able to cover over the last 20 years over there.
Gosh, it's amazing. My dad joked, we were on trip 7 to Jacksonville one year, and he joked, he said, we just got too many good teams. And I mean, I like this year, it's March, there's been bowling state championship, a swimming state championship, 2 basketball state championships, a wrestling state championship. Per capita, Jackson County got to lead the state in state championships per capita. I mean, it's just, and most years Scottsboro is going to win cross country and track and field championships, and wrestling's on a 2-year championship run. And you know what Carrie Ellison's done at Pisgah, and if this year, if North Sand Mountains girls had beaten Pisgah, I think North Sand Mountain girls could have been. That's just how good it is in Jackson County. We just, it's kind of bled over into DeKalb too. They're kind of in the same boat. They've got, they're just high school sports are so important up here, and they turn out a good product because they care about it.
One last question, question, I guess you said, over Phil. You mentioned Jacksonville. The mileage that you've got to go from Scottsboro to Jacksonville is crazy. But with Scottsboro City being in Huntsville, that's even more difficult for you, because how in the world is Scottsboro probably one of the furthest east teams other than North Jackson put way out west? How was you able to cover the teams that was at Jacksonville plus with Scottsboro being at Wallace?
Fortunately, this year they were all on different days. But a few years ago, there was a day I drove from Huntsville to Jacksonville and covered 2 regional championship games that day. And, there's some talk that the playoffs could change, so there may be more of that to deal with down the road. But as far as, I love the basketball playoffs. There's just something about that time of year, the process, and plus we've always got teams that are in it every year. But yeah, the Huntsville, I can tell you how to get from Huntsville to Jacksonville if you need me to. We can go through every little small town. And there's a street I got behind the slowest traffic coming through Holly Pond, and I get up there and 4 lanes, and I'm like, oh, I got it made now. And I go over this hill, and it goes back to 2 lane for about 20 miles. So, but I can tell you how to get to Jacksonville to Huntsville and vice versa.
Phil, fire off some questions at this young man. Let's put him in the hot seat for a little while, because he's normally the one asking coaches questions. Let's put him in the hot seat for a little while.
Yeah, that's definitely so. Well, I want to ask you about this. Of course, your wife, Melissa, and you've also got a daughter. Tell us a little bit about them. And we had talked about this before you come on air. Your family has to be troopers, because, we talk about how busy coaches are, football season, basketball season, baseball season. Your season starts in August and don't end till May. So your wife has to be a trooper.
Yeah, it's to do this. I mean, it's not as bad during football season because that's one night a week mostly, but basketball season is the toughest because it can be 2 to 3 nights a week. Even now in the spring sports, a lot of those games start at 4:30 in the afternoon, and you can get home at 7:30, 8 o'clock. There's sometimes that during basketball I might not see them until the next morning, which it's tough, but that's how we make that's part of making a living. But they're supportive of it, and they know that if they want me to do it right, and part of doing it right is having to be there. I know there's a lot of papers and stuff now are not covering games, and they're just dependent on what somebody sends them. And I don't think you can really cover the scope of what you're trying to cover if you're not checking in with teams and going and getting pictures and those things. But yeah, Melissa is great. Oakley's great. She's 11. She's about the biggest Alabama basketball fan I've ever seen. And me and her I had a blast talking to her Alabama basketball all season. And but they're interested. And they listen to my stories when I tell them about what happened, whether but Melissa and I have been married for 15 years, and it's flown by. And I know that because it's like for her to have to, sometimes 2-3 nights a week, I'm not going to be there. But I can't appreciate her any more than I do for what she does for us, for our family, for Oakley, and how she, kind of works around my job and what I'm doing.
You speaking of basketball, your daughter being a big Alabama fan, isn't it amazing how basketball has really grown in the South at the high school level? Of course, in Jackson County, I think basketball has always been huge, but it's amazing how it's drifted over into DeKalb County. Now you have schools like Tennessee, Alabama, and Auburn that are very competitive basketball, when we used to just see Kentucky and maybe LSU every once in a while. But in the South, basketball has really grown. The high school interest is there. The college interest is there. And it's amazing. I can remember back in my high school days, they just fielded a basketball team just because they had to.
Yeah, it's all, like you said, it's always been big here in Jackson County. But it's just spreading out. And it's just amazing when you think about the college basketball, because when I was in school at Alabama, we went to the NIT and we were fired up because we were getting to play some more games. And now they're Elite Eights and Final Fours. Auburn's been to 2 Final Fours in 6 years now. We were talking about it the other day. It's kind of flipped. The football playoffs this year were all northern teams, like in the Final Four, and then this year you look and it's all southern teams in the basketball. So it's an interesting flip there. But what the SEC did this year, I just think there's just a growing interest in basketball altogether, and there should be. I mean, there's no reason these schools that make millions and millions in the SEC shouldn't be good at basketball too. Be good at everything.
Yeah, definitely. So, of course, that spills over. Used to baseball was more of a Midwest, out west sport. Now it has drawn in where the SEC is the best, and even softball. You draw Oklahoma and Texas into the SEC. And now softball has become huge, and the South has kind of sort of taken over. We may have slipped back for a couple of years in football, but it'll come back. But at the other sports, the Southeastern Conference is basically taken over.
Yeah, I think softball is just, you can look at it at the high school level. That's one of the biggest growing sports we've had in Jackson County, because we went from about 0 to 60 because it was Pisgah and pretty much everybody else. And then everybody started putting an emphasis on it. And now, Scottsboro has been to a couple of state championship games. North Jackson won a state championship. Skyline won last year. North Sand Mountain is coming on. So, it's just, that's another exciting sport in Jackson County that's been on the rise and that people are really enjoying. And schools and communities are investing in. They've got great coaches, and it's been a cool thing to see that kind of. I remember a few years ago, I had 3 state championship games, like all in one day almost, or 2, one the night before and 2 the next day down at Oxford. And one of the photographers that shoots on the state level is like, Bowen, how many championship games are you going to cover? But our teams just keep rolling down there. And I think, right now there's kind of a rebuilding year for some of the teams in Jackson County, but it's all young teams. So it's almost like, well, in 2 or 3 years, it'll be kind of rolled back to the way it's been the last 2 or 3 years. So I think we'll have a reload, but softball is another one of those. Cross country is getting bigger over here. Volleyball is growing, and I think this one, in certain sports that have always been established, I think when these other schools get into the, I guess, newer to them sports, all they know is winning, so they want to win at the new ones too. And I think that's one of the biggest things that I've seen from schools over here. And it's true at the high school to college level. If you commit to getting better and winning, I mean, most of the times you will.
Well, Jason, because I want to kind of draw Northeast College into this. Now they've got softball, they've got golf, they've got cross country. That helps a lot of the interest around here. And we've always thought, especially in our girls' sports, are very competitive around here. And now that Northeast has sports, that adds just a little bit more spice, because we're going to get to see some of our local kids play at Northeast. And who's to say they won't go on and play at a 4-year school?
I think several years from now, Northeast is going to be one of the best JUCO programs, probably in the Southeast, if not the nation, just because of the facilities that the investment they've made, the facilities they've built, the coaching staff it's a D1 level coaching staff. And the kids that have signed out there, the kids that I've talked to about it they're super impressed with what Northeast has done with the coaches, the facilities. I mean, so I know they've had their ups and downs in year one. I think it was kind of unrealistic if people thought they would come out there and steamroll everybody, but that program out there is going to be fantastic, and it's going to be very beneficial to the kids around here, I think.
Hats off to Dr. Campbell. He's had this vision, and it's worked out well, and he has spared no expense. And of course, people like Nathaniel Ledbetter that's really helped behind the scenes. They've had a lot of financial backing to make this sports program successful.
Yeah, if you're going to do it, do it. Don't do it all the way. Don't just kind of dabble in it. And I heard the guy joke. So when it was announced, he's like, "Were they going to play at the Powell Town Hall or Town Park?" Things like that. But I mean, they have gone and put together one of the night. I mean, it's a stadium that some D1 colleges would love to have. And like I said, the coaching staff, Coach Guthrie and Jimmy Kalidas and Courtney, I mean, they're just, for them to put together that kind of coaching staff with the facilities and with the commitment that Dr. Campbell and them have, I mean, it's going to be their program that the sky's the limit for it.
Well, getting back to talk a little bit about you, what is your favorite sport to cover?
I don't know if I have a favorite one to cover, but I do love the basketball playoffs. That's one of my favorite things to keep track of and cover. Jacksonville, I like it. It's more than probably the state tournament, just because it's usually there's a bunch of Jackson and DeKalb and even some Cherokee and Marshall County teams that are close that you've kept track of and know about. And how everybody from everywhere, it's almost like a big reunion, because you're going to see people camped out down there. And to me, that's one of the funnest things I cover each year. I like covering the softball playoffs too. That's fun. Football, of course, is a spectacle on Friday night. That's always fun. But then you get into, some of these other event, that a lot of like cross country. I mean, it's amazing that these kids go out there and run 3 miles, and it's like, man, that'd be punishment if somebody told me I had to. Number one, I couldn't do it, but it would be like a punishment if somebody said, "Hey, go run." But these kids are out here doing it, and they're tweaking off miles like it's nothing. And then we've got wrestlers over here at Scottsboro that are, my gosh, they're competing at national level. It's it's fun to see. I've talked to guys that cover sports in counties that they don't win much, and they rarely, it's a big deal if they make it to Jacksonville. And don't get me wrong, it is a big deal to make it to Jacksonville. But when our teams make it, they're expecting to go to Birmingham and compete for a championship. Some of these guys are like, man, I get to cover a sub-regional game this year, or I had a team was the 4th seed in the football playoffs, so I get to cover a playoff game. That's the fun part about being here, is there's always somebody is doing something incredible, and that makes it a lot easier to write when you're writing about things that are historic and first times or dynasties or things like that. I mean, it's just, like I said earlier, the per capita on state championships and state tournament trips and state championship games I've covered, it really doesn't make sense when you look back on it based on the size of, the schools. I've got 6 high schools, and, this none of, or I'm talking 7As and 6As. We're talking a 5A, a 4A, and 3 2As and a couple of 1As. So, I mean, I got 7 schools, and my math is not good, but you called me a young man. I don't feel like it anymore, though.
Well, and we've talked about this before. I mean, I'm sure there's opportunities out there where you could go, probably to bigger areas and make more money as a sports writer. But you're kind of in the mecca of being in Northeast Alabama, kind of the mecca of sports, because I don't know if there's anywhere that has more, not only successful teams, but community, parent interest in their sports. I mean, everybody in these 2 counties are very passionate about their sports.
Yeah, I mean, you go to places, and even midweek games and basketball in February or January, it's packed because people care about it. And we're a business, so that makes it easier to sell papers when people care in that area, that care about the sports. And there's so many good rivalries and things like that that keeps everything going over here. I mean, it wouldn't, it's a job, but it's fun. I mean, there's times it is work and it feels like work, and the older I get, it feels like work, but it's fun too. I mean, there's days I come in and I look up and it's almost 5 o'clock, and it's like, well, man, that wasn't the day. I've had jobs when I was coming up trying to make some, making extra money where you're clock watching all day, but this one here is, it's different every day, and it's fun. And that's probably the biggest thing I can say about it, is I've done something fun for a career to make money, to feed my, help support my family. And I can't be grateful enough for that.
Yeah. And I guess sometimes it gets a little monotonous coming into work in the mornings, staying late at night. But when you're out, covering basketball, covering coaches, you kind of sort of become a fan too. And that's the part of it you love.
Yeah. I mean, I've seen so many cool sporting, not necessarily historic things that have happened in Jackson County over the last 20 years. It can be anything from, and I want to treat every accomplishment by every school. I want to treat it the same. If I remember Woodville broke through and their girls went to the Final Four one year. And I mean, that was the biggest thing that had happened to Woodville girls basketball. And I hope that the way I covered it, they remember that helps them remember that. And that's kind of what I want to do. Yeah, I want to keep people informed, and I want to write cool stories and things like that. But because I look back through those archives and I think, man, this is so cool that what happened in these sports in the 70s and 60s that I can read about here in 2025 and it still be as in depth and real. And that's what I want when I'm dead and gone, and somebody looks through these archives and can look back that when they played, when they were in high school 40 years, before, and it takes them right back to that day.
Yeah, and I know exactly what you're talking about because we won a state championship. It was 40 years ago this past fall, but you still hear people talk about it. Still hear stories about it. And you're just kind of like, well, I was a part of that, and it's amazing how that lasts. Because I think when this happens, especially like when what Coach Ellison has done, you become a legacy when you win a championship. And people will always remember that, and that's what makes it worthwhile for these young people. I know you get to cover that, but it's memories, and that's what this is all about.
Yeah, I mean, these kids invest so much in it. I want to do a little part to help them, to see their reward from it, and then where it's kind of tangible. I want to be in. I want the things that I write and pictures I take. I hope they're in their scrapbooks, not in a vain way, but I just want these kids to be able to look back and say, "Hey, I remember when we won the Sand Mountain tournament, or I remember us winning the sectional cross country." And here it is. I can read about it. I can see my time, what I ran 30 years ago. So yeah. To me, I mean, that's a rewarding part of it, especially like when I see things. When I see people have things framed and that they, that they ask me, for pictures and things like that. That 'cause sometimes you can think. I mean, it's whatever job you're in, you wonder if if it's worth it, or if it matters or anything like that. But stuff like that always, whatever you do, if you see that it matters to one person, then it makes you feel better about it.
Yeah, and I know that's kind of like the way it is for us on scoreboard. You got a job to do, and you don't really pay that much attention. But then when you get out and you hear the stories about, it inspires others, and it makes you understand that you really do make a difference, and that, and that's what keeps you coming to work every day. I think, Jason, is because other people inspire you just by letting you know, hey, thanks for what you do.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and I just. I don't see myself as some big important cog in this sports world or anything over here. I like covering the games, and I want to do it well so that the people will like how I do it. I don't want to just go out there and write stories that start with, North Sand Mountain defeated Dade County 7-5 in baseball action today. I mean, I want a cool lead, and I want people to say, that was a cool story. And even when it might be an early February baseball game or something that in the grand scheme of things, nobody's going to remember. But and that's always the thing when I'm riding back from somewhere. I'm going home after a game or something, and I'm already trying to come up with a lead. And because once you get the lead, everything else seems to flow. But it's kind of weird, It's like you watch a game for 3 hours and you spend however long the trip is just trying to already think about the story. And I've had to get the tape recorder out and record myself on the road because I didn't want to forget how I had it structured in my head or anything. And then you get back to the office and one little thing pops in your mind, changes the whole thing. But but that's just part of the process of I want people, when they look at it, they're like, hey, this guy cared about it. Because I mean, I've gotten papers. I used to drive my wife crazy when we would go on a trip or somewhere because I'm pulling off at just about every other exit to say, hey, let's see if this town's got a newspaper. And I was collecting newspapers. I'd take a roll of quarters, on vacation to get newspapers. But I saw a lot of places that just didn't, their sports was just an afterthought. They just kind of, let's get what we can. We'll run AP stuff, and somewhere like in Scottsboro, Alabama, and Higdon, Alabama, and Skyline, Alabama, if you want to read about Alabama football, there's a million places to read about it. But you're not going to read but the only place is to read about Skyline basketball for the most part is in the Jackson County Sentinel. So that's why I focus. I mean, I don't run things unless the only college sports or anything like that I run. It involves a Jackson County kid. Russ Marr becomes all-time leading scorer at Swanee. We're going to run stuff like that. But I've had people say, "Why don't you cover college football? Why don't you do this? Cover the Braves?" Because you can get that anywhere.
Yeah.
What I'm trying to do is I'm Jackson County centric, and I want you to get the paper because you care about Jackson County sports because it's the only place you're going to get it.
Well, this is a question I was going to ask you later on. I've got a couple more, and I'll let Howie take a turn. Do you ever get to a point where you kind of have writer's block?
Yeah, I have. It's tough, but there's times that you're struggling on things, especially like after football games. Because you've got to come straight from the field back, and you got to hustle. It's got to be to get in the paper the next morning, and you're racing the clock. And you look up and you're a mile and a half from the Sentinel office, and you're like, "Oh, I still don't know how I'm going to start this story." But usually, there's only been a few cases where I've ever just gotten a funk where I was just really like, "Oh, I can't." I'm struggling to put stories together. But there's times where I'll say I've had good leads and I've had bad leads because I've had leads I've just had to go with because the time and was against me and I just had to roll with it. But it's funny how things will just come to me about how to do stories. And I remember the first year that Scottsboro's football team won at North Jackson. Bo Nix was quarterback, DK Billingsley running back. Scottsboro's favored, and I just all week I was like, okay, if Scottsboro wins, what's going to be my headline? And I just, I had one for if North Jackson won. That came to me easy. And it was like I want a good headline. I want a great headline for this because it's historic if they win. All week, couldn't think of it. I'm driving to the game. I go through the red light at Stevenson there, and it just pops in my head, one for the road, because that was the first one that they'd won on the road. And I remember I was so excited to get into the game. I was like, okay, now I can just enjoy the game and cover it because I'm not stressing about what the headline's going to be. There's weird things like that I remember that, just the little stresses that part of this job that don't seem weird or would seem weird to others, but I mean that's just stuff that I kind of obsess over, I guess, just because it's like to me you got to have a great headline, you got to have a great lead, and you got to have a great photo, and the rest is easy after that.
I want to ask you this: who over the years has been your easiest coach to interview?
There's been a lot. Most of them are very, very receptive. I remember when I started at the Weekly Post, I was kind of scared of Paul Benefield because of just things I had heard. But he was great to me, and probably because of Dwayne. But if Dwayne trusted me, then he was. But I mean, I've always had a great relationship with him. I love Coach Benefield. But yeah, I remember even those early years. I mean, probably one of the easiest to talk to was Brian Mashburn that coached Sylvania in the early 2000s. I mean, because he would tell you 5 stories after you ask the question, then double back and answer your question. But there's been so many good ones. I don't really have anybody that was just, it's like, I got to go talk to them. But they're mostly everybody. I don't know if I've been around long enough. They're just like, I just have to talk to Bowen, so I'll just get through it or anything like that. But most everybody, they're all great. There's nothing. I don't have any coaches where I've really, there's been some questions asked of me, of course, through the years, but on maybe a few things they didn't like or wanted it done a certain way. But I've not really had any coaches that I've had to like I said, that it was just, God, dread having to go talk to them or call them or anything like that. Most of them, they're all great. I bug them probably more than I should. And I'm texting them and all the time, even asking them questions about things they've heard about other things. But they've all, that's the biggest thing to me, is building those relationships have made this job a lot easier. And I can't imagine if I didn't get the help from them, my sports section couldn't be like I want it to be, because it would just be, they make it so much easier to get information and things like that. And they're a big help, and I can't thank the coaches enough. And this is not I'm not in it. I'm not one of these gotcha journalists that I want to get the coaches. I want to get the players. I mean, I just, I'm not. I'll do those stories, but I hate the controversial stories, and I just, because I just don't. That's not my personality. I don't like the conflict. I don't. If I have to do it, I have to do it. It's part of the job. But I'm not one of these guys that's looking out there trying to start things and be a gotcha guy. And I would much rather things be all wins and covering the wins and covering the fun times, and even covering the even in when there's tough losses and things. These I hope I can maybe put the spin on it, that I'm not necessarily the spin, but I just want people to try to tell the story. Yeah, here's the loss, here's what happened, but this is also the first year this team got this far, and these kids have done this. And because I think high school sports is such a good thing for kids, because it teaches them so much. And I don't want to be somebody that's out there running it down that might discourage somebody from even trying it. So I won't. Yeah. And like I said, there's times when you have to write things that are hard and tough, and you just have to bear down and do it, because that's life. But I don't want anybody to worry that I'm Bowen snooping around. He's trying to bust us on something, because that's, if it happens, it happens. I'm not looking. That's definitely not the journalism I want.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the way we do things at QSB, is you want to make something positive out of everything, because you want everybody listening. Of course, naturally you're going to have more of the winners that's going to listen, but you don't want to ridicule and put folks down. You want there to be a positive message. I know Robertson, football coach at Hoax Buck, told me one time, he goes, Phil, the reason I enjoy listening to y'all show, we can get beat 42-0, but after y'all talk about us, you would have thought we won. And that's a good thing. That means we're not browbeating anybody. We try to keep everything positive. Yeah, winning's great, but participation and pulling communities together, because sometimes you can be on a 1-9 football team and you have just as many winners on that team as you do a team that's 10-0.
Yeah. I've had, through the years, I would run pictures of kids crying and things like that, hugging the coach, tears coming down. And I would get people say, I hate when you run those crying pictures. But that tells the story better than words can at times. And it shows you what it meant to those kids. And usually when I explain it to people, a lot of times they're receptive to that. Other times they're just, oh, you shouldn't run that. But I think that tells the story. And even in losses like that, if you lose in a regional championship game, there's no shame in that. My goodness, how many other teams would love to have been there, in that situation? But I want to tell the story. It might not be the story that the readers want to read, or of course, if your team loses in the finals, that's not what you want to read. But you got to tell the story of how it was. And but I do think that winning is not the end all in some of these stories, and that there can be good stories without, when you come up short. There's always things, and I always try to do that and look at. Of course, I'm going to talk about the loss, and tell you how it happened, and get the coach's opinion, why, and everything. But there's always that, like North Sun Mountains girls, they lost to Pisgah in the regional finals, lost to their rival. On the surface, that's a hard thing to take when you lose to your rival to go to the Final Four. But then when you back up and look at it, that's the first time North Sun Mountain's been in the regional final in 12 years. First time they've been in the regional in 5 years or 7 years. And and Jeremiah Haynes has worked his tail off to try to get that program built back up. So you have to acknowledge that and lean on that and be proud of that if you're part of that. And I want to tell, and I know that they are, and I want that to be part of the story that I tell, that they have made these accomplishments, because there's accomplishments even in defeat.
Well, I want to ask you, this will be a two-part question. I'll let Howie take over. This is two parts, so you can share both. What is probably your most memorable moment covering sports? Like, for instance, the greatest, win by a school. What was your most memorable positive sports story? And maybe what was your biggest heartbreak in covering a team?
I think probably the biggest wow moment for me was the 2010 Jackson County Boys Tournament Basketball Finals. Triple overtime, and Chance McCarver went absolutely insane. He could not miss a shot. They were playing Pisgah, and they went to triple overtime. And it almost came down to like Chance McCarver versus Zach Behringer and Brandon Sensor for Pisgah. They were making shots. Chance was making a shot. He hit a shot like over the side of the backboard on the baseline to force overtime. Hit a half-court shot to force the second overtime. It was one of the most insane things I've seen, because it was one ridiculous shot after another, and it was, just nothing but net. And I remember after the game, I was talking to him, and he was so tired. I'm like, "How did you do that?" He said, "I don't know." And to me, that game has always just stuck out, because it was just something that in the atmosphere, because it was just a roller coaster of emotion. The overtimes lasted about an hour, and there was 3 or 4 times that each team looked like they had the game won, and it just kept going back and forth, and Section ended up winning. I think it was 113 to 109. That was just one of the most amazing performances in games that I remember. It's funny that I've covered a lot of state championship games and things like that, but that's probably one of the things that stick out the most to me. Just going back this football season, the 5 Pisgah Thursday night kickoff game where half of North Alabama was there. I didn't know you could get that many people in Pisgah, and they're just stacked on top of each other. And then it turns out just an amazing game. Luke Gilbert running around making throws, and that's probably one of the best football games I've covered. The Scottsboro Etowah 1-2 game in 2016. That was an amazing atmosphere. It was at Scottsboro, and that was one of that one's a memorable one for me. Probably the biggest heartbreak is probably, I don't know. I've seen a few heartbreakers. There's been a few teams that I really felt should have won state championships that for some reason or not, it just didn't happen. And it's hard to pinpoint, but I think you go back 2006, Pisgah could have won and finished off a 34-1 season. I think that's probably Coach Ellison's still his toughest finals, if you ask him, to deal with, because that team that won it the previous year and they were so good. But that was an amazing team. It didn't not winning it doesn't diminish what they did, because they were just unbelievable. But Skyline's girls had a tough finals a few years ago, and girls basketball, and the way that it's just I've covered some really tough ones, and and it's hard to ask questions and try when it's really just, but I think I just tell myself, hey, you got to do this, because 15, 20 years from now, these kids are still going to want to know what happened and how big of a deal this was, even though they're heartbroken right now. And there's been times where I've had to cover things that, deaths and things like that of people. And, when I found out about TJ Perry last September, I mean, that was hard, and even with Dwayne, knew it was coming, but, I had to write Dwayne's obit, and that's probably the toughest thing I've ever had to write. And, our family's gone through we've lost some people the last few years, and there's some loved ones and then friends, and, sports has been an escape for me in a lot of that. And, with Dwayne, we kept it. Dwayne's had ALS, and we knew the end game. We knew what the result was going to be, but we carried on like we did 20 years ago. And so when I think about things, how tough things get at work, or when I'm covering games, it's just kind of like, let's put it, I guess, in a new perspective for me. And my advice to these kids, they put a lot of work into it. And when it doesn't go your way, that doesn't invalidate whatever happened or all the work you went into it. And because 20, 30 years from now, you're going to enjoy it, whether you won the state championship or you went out in the area tournament. And because there's going to be the stories that you're going to tell about your teammates and those things like that, they're going to mean as much to you as if you won the state or you won 3 games. They're still going to matter to you, and they're still going to affect you years later.
Well, yeah, I understand what you're saying. That's like, for instance, I've got a state championship ring. I don't ever wear it. It's in the drawer. It's great to win state championship, but it don't define who I am. That's not the person I am. I was just blessed to play on a state championship team. And that's happened for a lot of people, but, it doesn't make you successful in the game of life. A lot of times losses, you learn more from losses than you do ever from wins. Well, Howie, I'll let you take over let Jason answer a few questions you can throw at him.
Yeah, Jason, you mentioned Dwayne. He took a chance on you back in the day, and you looked up to him and learned a lot from you. And now you're kind of off the senior spokesman here in Northeast Alabama. And Heath Hambrick, as a new sports editor, Jason is the one I look up to. So, Jason, how does that make you feel?
Well, I hope I'm giving him something to look up to. I mean, the way I've done it, I don't know that everybody does it the same. I just hope that he can take something from the way I've tried to cover things and maybe adapt them to the way he's going to do it. I mean, everybody does it a little different, but I think the main thing I want to do is to show that, people would say, well, we're a small county, but I want to cover it like it's the big time. TJ Perry used to always say that, make wherever you are the big time. And I think a lot of our coaches go by that. And I think that our kids that play sports here do that. And I want to do that in covering them. And so, I mean, that would be my advice. We need more people doing this. I mean, it's getting tougher to get sports writers and things. I mean, papers are downsizing. People ask me all the time, are we affected? Well, not really, because I mean, the bigger papers are, but the hometown newspapers, where that's the only place you're going to get your information. we're still doing well, but we need people. We need people on the ground getting out and covering those. And I'm telling you, covering high school sports, I think is the most fun thing. A little bit in college, I dabbled in covering a little bit of college stuff, but to me, this is the most fun thing, and that's why I went this route, because I know what it means to every little community. To see teams travel hours to watch a 1A sub-regional basketball game. I mean, that's stuff like that. I mean, that keeps me excited about it. As long as they're interested, I'm interested. Kind of a deal. I want to be there to supply, supply them with information and stories, and even maybe a way to keep memories. And so, I mean, that's kind of the way I would do it, and that's the advice I would give people that want to do it. I mean, you gotta work at it. It's not a 9 to 5 if you want it to look right and be right, but it's definitely worth it. And for you, and I hope for what I do, I hope the county finds it worth it.
I know they do, and something to kind of piggyback on that is you get out and you make friends with people that goes to these games to where they can actually help you out on some of the games that you can't make it to by sending you scores.
Oh yeah, my phone's always buzzing. I'm getting scores from here and there and everywhere in between. And it'd be like, yeah, it's definitely not a. I mean, I'm putting it together, but I'm not a one-man band, because I'm getting scores, I'm getting stats, I'm relying on coaches, and I might have the baseball coach sending me football scores on Friday night or things like that. I mean, it's so many people that help me out and are receptive to what I try to do that make the job a lot easier for me, no doubt.
I know when I was running the clock at 5, and 5 area teams was mainly Jackson County teams, and I would look around. If I didn't see you there, I would try to get a picture of the scorebook when the game was over with and send it to you, just to try to help you out, because I knew that you can't be in 3 different places at one time.
Yeah, the camera phone has changed. I remember the days when I started, I would have to go there and write the leading scores down out of the scorebook. Now I just walk over there, snap a couple of pictures, and like you said, you send them to me. Coaches, I know I bug them to no telling how much during basketball season. Hey, will you send me your scorebook sheet? Will you send me your scorebook pages? But they do, and that's how I'm able to post basketball scores each night, and how I'm able to get recaps. And I can take those scorebook pages, and if there's something I need, I can talk to the coach and almost write a story like I was there. I've had people say that, I didn't see you at that game. I got enough help, to make it seem like that. And but yeah, I mean, there's so many people like that, like you. There's so many others that, whether it's a score or it's something, sending me a stat sheet. It's just, there's so many. I mean, my contact list in my phone is just, I just hope it can't be maxed out, because I've got so many numbers. Some of them may be people I haven't, gotten anything from in 5 years, but if I texted them and asked them a question, they'd be more than willing to shoot me back some information.
Yeah, no, I remember. Yeah, Jason, I was going to say, like even on the scoreboard, every once in a while you'll send me a text. Says, Phil, do you have the Valley Head score or the Appalachian score? Yeah, because I know you're searching, and I'm on air, and I let you know, I send it right back to you. Of course, I've had to reach out to you sometimes to find out Jackson County scores. So, it all goes hand in hand.
Yeah, everybody helps you out. And it's the same thing, if I've got teams that play down around Anniston or over in Florence, hey, can you send me what you get on this game? Sure, when they come here the next year, I'll do the same thing. It's that's one of the biggest helps, especially on a Friday night football, when you got guys that you know at other papers that are more than willing to share stuff with you and help you out in that regard. That, it's everybody that pitches in. If I tried to write a thank you column, I'd run the section out because I wouldn't have enough ink to write the names. Because through the years, 20 years of, gosh, there's just been so many people that have contributed. Really, they're not getting their name in there, and sometimes people, hey, here's this, don't tell it where you got it, but all of those folks, there's just been so many that helped me to do it the way I want to do it and make it hopefully as good as I can make it.
Well, Phil kind of took the words right out of my mouth, because I know on Friday nights, whatever game I'm at, I'm sending to Phil. And if it's a Jackson County team I'm watching, I'm sending it to Jason. Phil's sending me stuff. Jason will send me stuff. And it's like we just got constant scores flying all over the place.
Yeah. And at the same time, I'm normally trying to take pictures and chart plays. So it gets a little hectic, but it's fun. I like to keep I'm a score watcher too. So I know everybody wants to watch the scores just like I do, because I want to see them. That's how I keep track of them when I'm not there, and I know everybody else is that way. So I try to post it, even though it can get a little hectic on the sideline trying to do all three of those things. But in the end, I know that it just keeps everybody engaged, and that's one of the funnest things is if we all care about it, then that's good for me, because that keeps people, wanting to read my stories, wanting to read the paper. And so to me, it's worth the juggling. I've still managed to not get ran over on the sideline. So I'm going to jinx myself, but I'm looking down, I'm typing, I'm charting plays, I'm taking pictures. So, but
you just jinx yourself, man. You just jinx yourself. First game of this season, you'll be on the sideline, first play, and
or get my knee blown out or something.
There you go.
I'll have to go and set the stands the next week or something. But yeah, I like to post. I get on there Twitter and I'm looking for scores, and I'm like everybody else. I get frustrated if I can't find them, so I want to throw scores out there to maybe help somebody else not be score frustrated, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. I know one night I was helping with Section, and Section was playing somebody that's coming to Monsoon. I didn't see you, so I sent you the scores, and halfway through the game, you're like, I'm here. Yeah. I didn't realize that I was upstairs in the press box, I think, and using the lower level of the press box, or vice versa.
I've taken pictures from press boxes. I remember it was probably 6 or 7 years ago. There was such a Friday night. It was going to be a downpour, and everybody moved to Thursday except Pisgah and Plainview. I was like, oh, gosh, we're going to get soaked. And I managed to get to the press box, and I hung out the door of the press box and got a pretty good raining picture right at the 50-yard line right in front of me. It turned out pretty well, but I will retreat because the camera is expensive. So if I have to, I'll retreat to the press box. But I love being down there on the sideline, because every now and then you'll pick up things that you wouldn't if you were in the press box. Some things that you might put in the story, some things that are just a funny story to tell later. But the Friday night thing, Friday nights and football is one of those things that's different, because it's just, I'm not saying it's more important or anything, but there's just a different feel to a Friday night football. The community, there's just a different kind of buzz to it. And I don't know if it's just because it's a countdown all week to it. It's it's a one and done every week, but football Fridays are definitely kind of special here. Even we've had years where the teams might have one team go to the playoffs, but then probably the last 10, 15 years, our football as a whole has been a lot better. And it's pretty much like that just about every sport now. I mean, there's usually more than half, 4 to 5 of the 7 schools might be going to Jacksonville in basketball, and the school. I mean, and schools are starting new sports. I mean, North Sun Mountain started wrestling this year. They had some guys go to state. Volleyball is picking up. So I mean, it's just this county is it's a rural county, and sports are kind of the main attraction in a lot of towns, and I think that helps make the teams be better, and they put the effort in, and because if you want something to do on Friday night, well, a high school football game, that's a perfect place to go. I can go watch basketball and see some of the best teams in the state. They're 10 miles apart from each other, and just things like that. So and to be able to cover those kind of games and those kind of, I don't know, I can't imagine if I was covering a bunch of teams that they didn't care about the sports, and I can't imagine how tough that would be to have to go to watch those games night in and night out when it's just we're out here running through the motions and that there's no crowd, the crowd's not into it and things like that. I definitely think that the importance that the schools and the communities put on the sports makes my job a lot easier and more fun.
Well, I didn't know about North Sun Mountain having a wrestling team until I'm sitting here at the house one night thumbing through the old Twitter machine, and all of a sudden Jason Bowen's talking about North Sun Mountain wrestlers winning some matches.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if there's more to come. Soccer Scottsboro has started soccer. Stevenson Middle has started soccer. I mean, there's a tennis team in Scottsboro now. Swimming is cranking up. Yeah, I mean, it's now. I think there'll be more of these sports to expand, and the more sports the better, because there's not all kids are football or basketball or softball, baseball.
Well, I tell you something in the future, you may start seeing flag football.
Yeah. I think we'll have flag football. I would venture to say that Scottsboro is probably the first to do it because of just the student population. But when that time comes,
Fort Payne's talking about it.
Yeah, but I think eventually flag football will be because I think a lot of schools I've seen are not preventing their girls from playing volleyball and flag football at the same time. So, that's another thing that could help grow the thing, because you're not making them choose between sports. Because see, Jackson County, a lot of times you can see a kid play baseball on Friday night in the playoffs, and the next day is at the sectional track and field meet. And I think that's a big thing in Jackson County, like in DeKalb too. The athletes play multiple sports, so you got your best athletes out there playing multiple sports, so that helps. But yeah, I think flag football will be on the horizon. I think there'll come a time that we've got several of those.
Jason, we appreciate your time tonight. Got a few more questions we'll ask you, and then we'll let you get out of here. And let's get to know Jason on a personal side a little bit. We've been talking about the work side, so let's get to know Jason on the personal side a little bit. That's a little smile coming up on your face. I think you're a little bit worried about some of these questions.
I'm boring.
No, not at all. What's your favorite college team?
Alabama, Roll Tide.
There you go. 2 out of 3 here. That's not too bad.
Bill's got that ugly Tennessee poster back there. It made me think about maybe I should log off when I. He's like me though. He's licking his wounds over in the lead.
Hey, we got to have one winner in the room.
So, when Jason's not out covering sports and everything, what does he enjoy doing in his pastime?
Probably watching sports. Pretty much it. Hanging out with my wife and daughter, and that's pretty much it. We go to church and watch sports. a good combination, I think.
Sounds like the life right there.
Yeah.
Um, you travel a lot doing all these sports, different sports and everything all over the place. We talked about going to Wallace and Jacksonville and all that. Where does Jason like to go and eat at?
You can tell by looking at me that I'm not too picky, but I do. There's places though that you're like, oh, we got a game there. We know we're going to eat at this place, or we map it out. But you talk about the travel. I'm a road trip guy. I do. Let's just get in a car and just drive and just see new places. And maybe we might look up and we're in Chickamauga, Georgia, and we're like, well, how did we get over here? And but yeah, yeah, there's things like that. I mean, I don't have a lot of hobbies. I probably should get some, but like to fish every now and then when I have time, which is not much time. But COVID was one of the weirdest things because all of a sudden the games have stopped, and we're working just a few hours a day, and next thing you know, me and my nephew are fishing all the time, and then I'm like, man, I could get used to this, but then the game started back up, and I hadn't been in probably a year or so. So, but yeah, I mean, it's just that's kind of just the normal hanging out stuff with my family, and telling corny dad jokes to Oakley and embarrassing her when I can.
So back to the food. You bypass the food. Where do you like to eat at? Your favorite place to eat at?
I don't really have just a go to. I mean, we go. The one drawback about I will say the softball state tournament going from Montgomery to Oxford, the only drawback was you didn't get to stop at the Peach Pit and eat cantaloupe ice cream.
You sound like my brother-in-law. That's what he stopped for. Yeah.
But yeah, there's a lot of great restaurants. But my dad goes to a lot of games with me. He takes pictures for me, and on Friday night football, and he'll do some basketball and playoffs and stuff. And a lot of times he'll just tag along with me. So we've hit some of the weirdest places you can imagine. I remember the first time I ever went to Spring Garden. It's like I never could I got lost in there. My cell signal went out. I couldn't get my GPS dropped out. And it come to find out if I had went like another 500 yards over the top of this hill, there was the school. Yeah. I'd turned around and went all the way back out to the main highway and like mapped it out old school style. But for a road trip guy that likes to just ride and see new places, this has been this has been an added perk to this job because you might look up and you're in Bear Creek on a Thursday night watching a Woodville playoff football game, and got lost that night too. Most days I'm pretty good at the directions, but there's been some that I've never been late to a game, though. I probably jinxed myself again. So I'm going to be late and have a torn ACL because of getting run over on football.
So the first game of the year this year,
yeah,
it'll be the third play. First game, third play because you'll miss the first two plays.
Yeah, after I'm late because I got lost. But
yeah.
But yeah. Yeah, I mean, the road trip part has been fun. I've seen some places I never would have ever dreamed of, that I would be. You're driving through the middle of Chockalaka Park or Chockalaka area down there, not the park, but on your way to Waddowie, this weird places like that you wouldn't normally be going. And it's just like, okay, let's look at the mileage sheet. All right, this month we went to Ardmore, went to Waddowie. Here's one. Remember trying to find Lineville when Fife played down there. That was like pre-GPS, and those were always fun. You'd bust out the old Rand McNally.
Hey, I understand. Hey, I know, it's like doing all the football games I did when I was working over at K98. and all the places I went to, you'd be familiar with. And then doing scoreboard, you know all these names. Well, one time I'm driving through and we go right through Highland Home, the Flying Squadron, and they've got a jet that out to the front of the school, stopped, took a picture. So anytime that I go by there and see a school, whatnot, it's neat just to, know that you've covered or you've talked about that team, and right there's the school. So those kind of things are kind of neat when you cover sports.
Yeah, I've gone a few miles out of the way just to see a school that I've never been to and things like that. When I've been on, maybe we're going somewhere as a family. It's like I see, well, there's Appalachian High School. I've never been to Appalachian, so let me turn down here and get a look at it. Things like that, which again probably drives my wife crazy, but she's such a great person. So,
hey, to get to Appalachian, you got to be wanting to go there.
Yeah, Aniana vicinity, and then, but and I'm thinking about it. I think I've been like every school in Jackson, of course, in DeKalb, Marshall, Cherokee, Madison, Blunt, except in Etowah, except the weirdest thing, I've never laid eyes on Sardis High School, which is weird. Which is weird because I've been to so many. Sardis played so many of our teams when they were 3A, coming up, and now they're 5A playing Scottsboro. Just I've never been. I don't know why that just dawned on me. That's a weird thing, but I'm a weird guy most part. But I think weird. I'm wired a little different, but yeah, a few years ago I sat down and I was killing some time, and I think I listed like 100 and something different high schools I'd covered in football in 20 something years. So,
Wow.
that's probably 20 or 30 more added to that now. But, that it's, I couldn't imagine the basketball, the baseball, but I mean, there's been so many cool things that I've covered. I remember section baseball. The only time I've covered a state championship baseball section, went to the finals and played in Montgomery where the Biscuits play. That was one of the coolest things. And I remember their semifinal game with Ranburn, and just, in the baseball field right behind the football field at section, and there's just there's people everywhere up on the hill and almost back to where the football field started. People lined up watching that game, all those games, and I got, like, when you asked me to come on, I got to try to thinking about there's just like so many things. Like when we sign off, that there'll be things like, oh man, that was one of the best things, or that was one of the coolest things.
Yeah.
But I mean, there's just been so many cool moments that I've been at and got to see people reach their goals, and then, sadly for some of these guys and gals, I've seen them suffer some heartbreak, and that's always tough to tell that story, but that's a story you got to tell sometimes. But yeah, it's been fun to do this, and to, it's, like I said, it's not like I get up dreading punching the clock and clock watching all day to, waiting for the whistle to blow and I can go home. It's a lot of days hey, the day flew by because I'm doing something fun.
Last question, then we'll let you get out of here. When it's all said and done, Jason's in his 60s and retired and sitting on his front porch. Will you ever think about, or possibly be writing a book about everything that you've done?
I don't know. Maybe. I mean, I probably could. I could probably write a book just on Dwayne Patterson. I mean, I can't. Can't. We did this together for, I think, up until 2 years ago. We were not together every day, and we were talking about this stuff all the time. And he was a big help. For when I got started, and through it all. And I still think about him a lot. And so if I do ever write a book, then he'll be one of the big characters of it. And my family, and I've my wife and daughter, my parents, my mother-in-law, my nephew, my brother-in-law, my sister-in-law. We a few years ago lost my father-in-law. Then we lost my nephew, who was 16, in an accident. And that was the hardest thing that But this job was a distraction, and you still think about it. It's you move forward, you don't move on. You just try to move forward, and this job and these people that I cover will have helped in that grieving process more than they know. And then Dwayne helped so much, and then right after that, Dwayne got sick, and Dwayne was such a, I mean, to see how he dealt with it. I mean, he stayed positive. He didn't. He was like, Dwayne was always, you just deal with the circumstances and go forward. His mother taught him that, and she would have been proud of how he lived that out through this disease. And he didn't want to dwell on his disease. He wanted to talk about sports, because we talked about, and there's things I'll hear or something will happen. I'm like, man, I wish I could tell Dwayne, or just to get his reaction. But yeah, writing a book, yeah, I probably could. I don't know how interesting it would be, but I would have plenty of material. The folks around here have given me plenty of material, and I've enjoyed chronicling history, I guess, telling their stories.
Before we let you go, you done gave a lot of shout outs on that previous question, but is there anybody else you'd like to shout out before we get going?
I just appreciate everybody that helps me do what I do. From everybody from the people that work at this company to somebody that might send me an email with with an encouraging word or some information to help me cover something. It's just what I try to do is, if it's important to you, it's important to me, and I hope that I've been able to live up to that saying through these last 23 years, because I want the people, when I'm done, I hope people will say, well, he tried to cover everybody and cover them fair, and make sure that everybody in Jackson County that cares about sports can stay informed about sports. And hopefully I've got a few stories and pictures in people's scrapbooks when it's all said and done.
Well, Jason, we appreciate you joining us tonight. Sorry we kept you so long, but it's great talking to you, man. It's we could sit here for another couple of hours, or I could, and talk to you and pick your brain about everything, because if you go around and talk to a lot of other reporters, like you said, they might get one opportunity to cover a state championship in their lifetime, and you cover, I think, 5 already this year.
Yeah, I've covered 2 in a 24-hour span in basketball. So yeah, that has been a blessing that to cover so many fun teams and fun athletes. Just it's amazing that the athletes that this county's produced, the coaches. Some of the best coaches. I see coaches. These are some of the best that have ever done it, and they're doing it right here in our small little county. And I don't know. It's just when I got into it, I don't know what I thought it would be like when I got into it. I really, I love sports, and this was something to keep me in sports. But it's turned out what I've got to cover and the people I've got to cover and the athletes to cover. I mean, it's been amazing.
Absolutely. Phil, you have anything?
Well, I want to congratulate you on one thing we didn't talk about. You were elected to the Jackson County Sports Hall of Fame. I know that was a great honor, and that's a great thing because that kind of thing comes from your peers, and that's what makes that important. I want you to comment on one thing. We've got Luke Gilbert coming on tomorrow night on their podcast. Back in the days when Adam, his dad, played football, I was calling sports back then. He ended up going to Cumberland and playing football. Well, now all of a sudden, and we've talked about how sports has been elevated. We've had like Ike that went to UNB, he's now at UNA, Brody Dalton that's at Troy. Also, you got Logan Anderson who's went to Clemson. And now Luke Gilbert is on his way to Jacksonville. Boy, it's nice to see our kids getting to that Division I level because that means something. Are we going to see you maybe slipping off down to Jacksonville to cover while Luke is going through his years down at Jacksonville State?
I don't know, but there'll definitely be some coverage. Like I said, I try to keep track of all our college athletes, and when they do something, when they excel, I want people to know that on top of that, but also, maybe it's motivation for these kids that are coming up to see that you can be from small town Jackson County and go play at these big places and do big things. And I think some of our kids have gone places and done well, and I think that's helped open the doors for more opportunities at some of the bigger schools, coming up. And whether it's a quote unquote big school or not, if you go play college ball and if they're paying for your education, I mean, that's big enough. That's as good as D1 if they're paying for it. But yeah, we've had a lot of more kids get those opportunities through the years. But I think a lot of it's because there's a lot more work put into it, and emphasis put into it. And the kids here are willing to work because they want to be good and they want to win. And they've seen the players before them work and win, and they've seen the formula work. So they're just following it. And, we've had talk about Russ Marr. He's the all-time leading scorer now at Swanee. Callie Tinker that played at Pisgah just helped Wallace State go to the Nationals. Molly Hurd's playing at Lipscomb. She's a starter at Lipscomb. I mean, you see like DK Billingsley played at Troy. I mean, helped them win Sun Belt Conference championships. And softball, we've had through the years just a ton of players go play softball and make an impact. So I think as long as the impact that those kids have made have helped open some eyes and say maybe they are from a smaller school maybe, but look what the kids that have come from there have done at this level. So, and you look at Luke Gilbert. I mean, Luke Gilbert's going to be one of the best athletes if he played at a 6A school. I mean, because he's just an unreal athlete and a great kid too. You talk to him and it's like talking to a 30-year-old. I mean, he's very mature, and I saw where you guys are going to have him on tomorrow night. He'll be a lot more interesting than I am. I promise you that.
Yeah. Hey, it is a great family too.
Yeah. That Pisgah run they've been on in football, Pisgah football have been down for a long time, and Luke and Luke Pruitt and came along and he tried to build that thing up, and he's hired some great coaches to help him, and they've been on a great run the last few years, and Luke Gilbert was a huge part of that. I mean, but I'm telling you guys that watching him play in the regional final against Section, I mean, you're like, God, this guy is just an athlete. I mean, I think he had 35 points, and Section, they had such a great team this year too. I mean, God, there's just so many teams and players, that once I get to thinking about it, I start jumping from one thing to the next. Just the teams and the memories and the players and coaches. It's just been unreal.
Absolutely. Jason, once again, thanks for joining us. You're welcome back anytime. When you get during the summertime, you ain't got nothing going on, let us know. We'll bring you on here and we'll talk a little sports, get you fired up, get ready for the fall football season.
That sounds good, guys. I appreciate you having me on. Believe it or not, my first podcast. So, I have the dubious honor.
Good deal. Well, we'd love to have you back on. Sorry we kept you so long, but like I said, I can sit here and talk sports with you all day long because, like I said before we really got started, you do a great job as far as getting not just the team's scores out there, but you let people you get the players recognition out there, and that's what we do this for. And I know that's why you do the sports also, to let the kids get their name out there in the papers as well.
That's it. And I really appreciate you guys having me on, and be glad to do it anytime.
So for Jackson County Sentinel sports editor Jason Bowen, that's Phil Harris. I'm the Howard Chaney, and you're beyond the booth. Good night. God bless everybody.